Hi everyone and welcome back to STR Revenue Talk. I'm Jarne Vancompernolle, CPO at AutoRank and Otamiser. I'm very excited to kick off today's session. We're going to be diving into revenue management strategies to maximize your STR profits in Q4. And to help us today, we have two great guests, Leyts, solutions consultant at PriceLabs, bringing the latest data from across the US, Canada, and Mexico. Hey, Leyla, and welcome.
Thank you.
And Bart-Jan, founder and CEO of AutoRank and Otamiser, sharing how to turn those insights into actionable strategy. Welcome, Bart-Jan, as well.
Thank you for having me. Hi, Leyla.
Hey.
And we're going to look back at how the market performed this summer, and then we're going to shift to some forward-looking pacing and pricing data for Q4, so you can leave with a clear plan for the months ahead. Before we get started, a quick note on questions. Feel free to drop yours in the Q&A at any time. We have someone ready to answer them live in the chat. And we're also going to be covering a few questions at the end of the session. I suggest we get started, and I will give the floor to Leyla.
Cool. So we did a little bit of a deep dive on occupancy trends for a couple of regions of North America. Obviously, starting with Mexico first. We can see that occupancy between the last we're looking from September to August, right? So full 12 months, but not a full calendar year, right? So as we can see here, the black line represents the 23 to 24 cycle, and then 2024 to 2025 is represented in red. It looks like it's very, very similar, right? Like not huge decreases. We do tend to see a little bit of a lag in most of the months for 2024 and 2025. There's a couple of outliers here and there, but in general, kind of maintains a good consistency, just a little bit slower. And then with that, what we're picking up for the future is something similar, right? So we've got the final occupancies, listed there up top in black, and we've got our pacing down below. So how market occupancy is currently stacking up to the same time last year. As you can see, not a whole lot of far out bookings. April on is essentially dead. But for the next couple of months, we can see that, again, relatively really, really similar. It looks like September was a little bit more occupied than it currently is. But outside of that, very minimal, super far out activity, pretty consistent with the same time last year.
That sounds very interesting. If I already may ask a question, Jarne, could you go back to the first slide of the occupancy of Mexico last year? Leyla, would you think that the difference there in March and maybe February as well, would that maybe be due to the tariffs? Because 42%, 47%, that's significant already.
Yeah, 5% can mean a lot in a market, right? It's tough to say. Obviously, there's a lot of things going on in the world and a lot of things in North America specifically right now that can kind of cause hesitation with travel, right? So a tariff announcement or, the implementation of the tariffs is something that I've heard a lot of people possibly attribute these things to. Again, it's kind of tough to tell because there's a lot going on. But yeah, I feel like that's a significant enough decrease or lag where you can tell it's kind of an outlier in the opposite direction, right? The rest are like 2% differences across the board, whereas that's double, right? So yeah, something had to have happened in March. It may also be a matter of like an event happening there in March last year versus April this year, right? Because you can see the April uptick. So it's hard to say it's 100% this thing. But yeah, it's definitely something.
Right now, we're going to be diving into some market trends for Canada. Leyla, the floor is yours.
Yeah, absolutely. So if we can, yeah, perfect. Occupancy for Canada in the last year or so is shown here. You can see 2023 and 2024 is in black. So September of 2023 to August of 2024. And then we've got September to August of 2024/2025 in red. You can see that the occupancy looks pretty consistent. It looks like there are a couple of places where we see some differences, right? So I can see the January, for example, is like a place that catches my eye because it's the first dip that we see, right? Everything else is pretty consistent. And then March as well, another little bit of a dip. But then once we get to these nearer months, July and August, it looks like we are kind of shaping back up. We're catching up. We're seeing that occupancy increase, all of those things, which is telling me hopefully positive things. And then if we can look at the future pacing, perfect. So that pacing isn't necessarily shown here, right? So while we had a really good July and August, it looks like September is lagging a little bit compared to where we were at the same time last year. October as well, and so on and so forth. I won't go into the super far out months because we don't have that much data yet. But this is a trend that I'm noticing quite a bit, especially in the United States. I'm sure that this is definitely universal as well, but a lot of folks are seeing much smaller booking windows, a lot more last minute pickup trends. And I think that this definitely helps kind of support that, right? So we can see that even in Canada, where we're not necessarily lagging behind super far in occupancy in these summer/early fall months, we can still see that it tends to be more last minute, right? Like I would bet that once we close out September, we are going to see a very, very similar final occupancy versus, you know, what we're seeing here, which is a lag of what, 5%. None of the rest of the occupancies and all of the previous months, all of the historical data have that much difference, right? So we are definitely seeing some uptick in last minute bookings, which is interesting.
So in your opinion, Leila, the slower pacing for September, that's purely a booking window thing. It has nothing to do with with lower demand perhaps for September for the fall season.
Yeah, so it's definitely possible. There are numerous things. Again, it's hard to like attribute a specific event or a specific reason to falling demand. I just think that this year especially, and I'm sure a lot of folks watching are gonna say the same thing. I'm seeing anecdotally, right, a trend to much more last minute bookings, and I think if I'm right, we're going to end up with really similar occupancy to last year in September. We're just going to get there a little bit later than we did, right? So yeah, opinion wise, I think it's going to be more last minute booking trends more than anything in demand, but I guess we'll have to see.
So, Leila, you were mentioning like a change in booking patterns. So it's also something we established in our previous webinar, like there's really a change of booking behavior. Guests start booking later, different minimum length of stays. Is there for any revenue manager or any property manager using PriceLabs or setting up a revenue strategy, something they can do to really tackle those changing booking patterns?
Yeah, so absolutely. There's a couple of really cool, unique tools in PriceLabs that I think are really, really helpful with that. So one of the absolute like peak things that you should be doing is one of our occupancy-based adjustments, right? So inside of PriceLabs, you have the ability to say, hey, based off of current occupancies and certain date ranges, these are the discounts or premiums I want to give, right? So using that is going to be really, really helpful in maintaining that kind of last minute strategy, right? If you are someone who hasn't booked last minute previously and have just kind of gone by, the typical last minute defaults, that is probably something new to you, right? And you may be using occupancy-based discounts in general in PriceLabs. They tend to be a default setting, so you'd have to like actively turn them off. I'd recommend going in and customizing one of your own. If you look at recent booking metrics and notice, hey, my booking window is down by a certain percentage, that's also available in like the KPI section in PriceLabs to be able to highlight that pretty quickly. So once you establish kind of where you are leaning towards, how much shorter of a booking window you're having, that's where you can go in and adjust those couple of things. You can do so via last minute discounts, right? And kind of focus in on doing a slightly different strategy, whether that be being less aggressive in a couple of last minute time frames, or if it's maybe stretching out when your last minute discount starts so that you aren't discounting, or excuse me, so you start discounting a little bit sooner. So if people are booking relatively more last minute, you're being a little bit more competitive with those kind of slightly further out booking, competition there. So there's a couple of strategies. You can implement the same thing again in occupancy-based adjustment settings. You can go in and say, hey, I want to be really aggressive with my discounts in the next 15 days or in the next, I don't know, 5 days, whatever, depending on kind of your area and the trends that you're seeing. You can say, I want to be a little bit more aggressive while we don't have much occupancy. Once we get a little bit more booked up, I'm okay with kind of toning down how aggressive we are. Maybe start even including some premiums for those super last minute stays. All of those things are definitely possible, but I think the first thing you'd have to do is kind of figure out how it's impacting your own personal portfolio, and figure out maybe how you'd like to tackle that, whether it's, occupancy increases or keeping ADRs a little bit higher, whatever your goal is. There's a couple of ways to do that.
Taking into account this changing booking behavior in which people really tend to wait last minute to make a booking. We're looking at the graph here, and we're looking at occupancy for September, October, and November. Both of those 3 months are currently down versus same time last year. You mentioned before that you think the occupancy or pickup is still going to be coming, that lower pacing is purely due to shorter booking windows. Are there any indicators that you can look at as a revenue manager? How do you know that these bookings are going to be coming? How do you make a distinction between lower demand and shortening booking windows, because both will present themselves, let's say, as slower pacing than last year?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. So a thing that is going to be really helpful is historical data, right? So we're kind of implementing that in the webinar here, talking about the past and the future. And I think that's what you'd need to do here as a revenue manager as well, right? So in the Canadian market that we're looking at, you can see that we are definitely pretty on par with final, demand and occupancy trends. So I think that that's going to be a really good indicator. Typically, you'd have kind of more live data that you can keep track of. I would bet that if we looked at historical data, we could see that pacing kind of mimicked this as well. You can see, a month or two ahead, we're a little bit more behind than where we typically are. And I would bet if we looked at this data, a month ago, it would have said August is the same way. So it's going to be keeping an eye on these things month over month, more so than anything in specific that you can look at like one graph at a time. Again, with my experience and like how the summer has shaped up for a lot of the North American markets that I work in, I'm kind of leaning towards that just because I've seen it in other places. If we wanted to be a little bit more sure about that specifically with this data, you definitely want to look at these month over month trends. Like if I saw this and next month I was looking at this again, saw that once again, October was, 5, 10, whatever percent behind, and our September closed out pretty close to that 59%, I'd be pretty confident in saying, this is what's happening. It's a little bit easier to kind of monitor that month over month versus just look at one kind of data set and make an assumption.
Yeah. Okay. Let's go to the next slide. In the next slide, we're going to be looking at some market trends aggregated for the US across different regions. Please, Leila.
Sweet. Yeah. So we are looking at a couple of the kind of big general US markets here. Of course, you can see the regions on the left-hand side there. And then we can go ahead and see things like the past occupancy for July and August, and then expected occupancy in the next coming months. And again, you can kind of see a similar trend where we're behind a little bit when it comes to prior months, right? 3%, 4% in Hawaii. But that's kind of an outlier. The rest are like 2 to 3%, right? And then once we start looking at future occupancy, this is going to be, again, similar to that pacing graph, right? So here we're seeing much larger differences. It's not an overwhelming amount. It's not 20, 30% or anything crazy like that, of course. But I think that definitely is going to be another maybe indicator that we're tending to lean more towards the last minute bookings, right? So you can see everything in September is in the deep shade of red. The highest numbers that you see here are going to be on this section, the future occupancy September of 25. So I think that if I had this data in front of me, I would probably again be able to look at this and say something along the lines of, hey, occupancy is finishing up a little bit behind where we were last year, but pacing is definitely behind in the next month or so. My brain leads to kind of more last minute booking trends here as well. But again, it's hard to define, but I do see it kind of across the board in all markets. So
the occupancies is October also relatively low still, so I indeed also think there's still a lot of time for people to make those bookings. There's a bit of uncertainty, but yeah, I think I share your opinion. Change booking behavior is definitely going to have a big impact in these numbers here.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would bet you if we looked at something like the average booking window on these, it would shape up in a way where people are typically booking kind of a month out, right? Like approximately, 2 weeks to a month, whatever. A section that right now would be future occupancy for September of 25, right? And so I bet with those booking windows becoming shorter now, once we'll see September stabilize a little bit. And then we'll see the same thing happen to October, where October's numbers are going to increase a little bit in terms of occupancy. It's probably going to end up being a little bit more last minute. And if we look at this in about a month, I'm sure that, occupancy for October is going to be in the deep red at that point too.
What is an interesting one for me are the Hawaiian Islands. Is that they were down 4% year over year. Also, given that it's an island, so it's following flight patterns. Would you have an idea there? What happened, or is it also due to the uncertain book behavior?
I would bet that it's uncertainty when it comes to like finances and the economy and travel. I know that that's not like abroad, but it's not in the continental US, right? And then I think that a lot of folks who may be visiting the Hawaiian Islands from like, international visitors, maybe a little bit more hesitant as well due to some travel restrictions in the States and things like that, right? Like all of that definitely, I think, plays a factor in it. I'm not super familiar with the Hawaiian Island market, so it definitely could be something that I'm missing there, but I would bet that that's going to be a little bit more impactful to us. That's going to be a little bit more impacted by, international travel. It's a little bit more costly to go to the Hawaiian Islands from anywhere in the States for, the continental US, versus going to the Rocky Mountains or something, right? So travel costs, expenses, just the economy, things like that are all obviously going to be a factor in here as well.
It's also something we established at one of our previous webinars was that there was a slight increase in preference for driving holidays, a holiday where they could drive to, so they could cut back on some essential flight costs. So maybe this might be a reason.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really great point too. I know that there was, I don't know, some flight issues earlier in this year with some planes and things. So I don't know if maybe that's got people scared to fly or what. But yeah, you can definitely see it's much more intense in the Hawaiian Islands.
For me, also an interesting one because we see this uncertainty. Also, people are still in the unknown. As a revenue manager, it's sometimes hard to look at historical data because it's moving more and more last minute. Of course, PriceLabs has their aggressiveness factor, their markets, aggressiveness factor based on seasonality and demand. Do you guys see any impact there now that the market is changing to last minute, or is that all baked into the system?
Yeah, so that should be baked into the system. So the way that the settings work is going to be like proportionally, right? So if we are figuring out, seasonality or a demand factor even of X, the aggressive and conservative settings are going to play off of that, the data that we're figuring. It'll be a certain percentage more or a certain percentage less. So if we're seeing seasonality, seasonal trends tend to be decreased. Obviously, across the board, all three of those, conservative, default, and aggressive, are going to not go up as much as they may have last year, right? Proportionally. So it should be baked into the algorithm, and it should be kind of, I don't want to say done for you, but it should be something that's accounted for. You can always, of course, make sure to double check and keep an eye out on things, but a lot of that stuff should, PriceLabs should be taking account when we're suggesting the prices for your calendar.
Yeah. What about last minute discounts and occupancy based adjustment that you just mentioned? Is that something as a PriceLabs user you still have to configure yourself based on changing booking behavior, if that's the case, of course, for your portfolio?
Yeah, absolutely. So both of those options have default settings, right? And you can see what those are when you go to your customizations page, and you can double check to see what the trends are there. So one thing that I recommend is definitely going into like demand sensitivity or seasonality sensitivity, and just checking kind of how prices are being impacted by demand. And then in addition to that, you can also go to like last minute discounts and your occupancy based adjustments and see what the defaults are there. It'll give you an exact outline of, hey, typical last minute discount in this market, if we're being general, is going to be X discount over Y days, right? If you turn it up to be a little bit more aggressive, it'll be a slightly higher discount at Y days. So you can tinker with the PriceLabs suggestions there, where we'll again look at market data. It'll be dynamic and it'll be changing. Or you can go in and do something a little bit more manual, where you can say, hey, over the course of the next 16 days, I want to give a 35% discount, and I want it to gradually taper off, right? So that means same day bookings, you're going to have that super high discount, and then over the course of 16 days, decrease a little bit. If you'd like to be a little bit more, if you'd like a different approach, maybe, I guess is the better way to phrase this, than what everyone else in the market is doing, it may make more sense to go with something like a more customized and manual setting. If you want to extend and start your discount sooner than everybody else, that's an instance where we may do one of the manual, like gradual discount settings, right? And same with occupancy-based adjustments. You'll be able to see a default inside of PriceLabs. Again, that's going to be based off of typical trends in the market and things like that, right? There's, again, some pre-made templates of like default, aggressive, short minute booking window, things like that, right? That are all inside of PriceLabs. But you can definitely do some kind of tinkering in there, and that may make a lot of sense with these market trends that we're seeing, where we may not want to discount as heavily last minute as we used to, or we may want to start a discount a little bit further out in advance so we're a little bit more competitive. Definitely some options for customizing if you don't want to do what the market is typically doing, right?
Okay.
That's actually, it's for me, given the what you just said, and given the changes in the market, the changing booking pattern, the changing booking behavior, but also the adoption of dynamic pricing. If you compare it to, let's say, 5 years ago, people they have adopted dynamic pricing systems, like of course PriceLabs, more and more, so they are reacting more and more quickly. So as a revenue manager, as a property manager managing their own revenue, it seems to me, and especially given this data, it's becoming more and more hard, because at one point you have your owners, they have certain expectations, they don't know the market, so they want to have bookings. Then you have to play your own poker game of, do I drop my rates already, or not? Then you have internally, of course, you have costs you need to make, so you need to make sure the revenue is there. So as a revenue manager or a property manager managing your own revenue, to me, it seems that it gets harder and harder every day, because there is so much more things to take into account.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's kind of a weird time to be in our industry, right? Like we had a heck of a boom when, like, post-COVID, right? When folks were able to, when folks were traveling a little bit more or working from different areas from home, things like that, right? Definitely impacted. I mean, I don't know any folks who didn't have very, very good, like 2021, 2022s, right? And so kind of leveling out from that peak and from that high is interesting, because you do have a lot of folks who like just got into the industry and hadn't seen this world pre-COVID, right? And so I think it's kind of yeah, it's a big change, and so I think people are learning to adapt. I think the industry as a whole is kind of learning to adapt and to adjust, and hopefully expectations kind of change and all of those things, because we're probably not going to see like year over year increases like we did between like 2021 and 2022, for example. We're going to mellow out, I would bet, as an industry, and I'm sure everyone's kind of seeing that as well, right?
Interestingly enough, I was speaking to a property manager who's really seasoned and who was in the industry like from 2016, and they mentioned that like 2025 was the first time since COVID they really had to work as a team in getting a booking and getting the bookings in, because if one part of the sequence didn't deliver on what it's had to deliver, like the cleaning team, the operation team, the guest messaging team, then they just didn't have the booking, and it was this ripple effect. So to me, it's becoming harder and harder. And as Leila, you mentioned, the year-over-year increases are not going to happen anymore like we saw after the COVID boom.
Yeah, it's just a weird time, and I think so many folks got into this industry as well in that time, like between COVID and now. So it's brand new to a lot of people, right? So it feels very like challenging, and it feels like a lot more effort or a lot more inconsistency than what they've been used to. And so I think that is very fun. Maybe not so much. Maybe folks don't like it as much as I do, but I think that it gives you a really good opportunity to do things like this, right? Like look at some slightly historical data and see how we're pacing, and see, see how we're pacing with future data and stuff like that, and make some adjustments, and possibly have some room to kind of like make those tweaks and see some higher returns and things like that, right? Like it's really important to know that things change and stuff happens, but historical data is usually really good, like especially recent historical data. It's you're able to pick up on trends and things like that. So again, I think this webinar is going to be a very good kind of reminder to folks to double check everything.
Exactly.
For this webinar, we're going to be looking into a real life case study from one of our clients, so an optimizer / AutoRank effort. The screenshots that we'll provide throughout the slide deck are actually from PriceLabs, so some portfolio analytic screenshots. So let's dive right into this one. First of all, what is the graph that we're looking at? Many of PriceLabs users here and in the audience will obviously recognize this. We're looking at occupancy from last year, the market compared to the occupancy of the client. And as we can see here, the client is very clearly underperforming compared to the market. When we look at, for example, November, almost no occupancy on the books. Same for October. We are really getting behind the market here. Bart-Jan is going to give some more insight into the strategies that we've applied for this client and how we were able to turn this situation around.
Definitely, Jarne. So if we also look at, for example, RevPAR, so they were underperforming in terms of occupancy and RevPAR, but they came to us, so it's a shared customer of course, PriceLabs and Otamiser and AutoRank, and they were underperforming. They were in like this downward spiral that the only thing they could do was lowering their rates, hoping they could get a booking. So in the beginning of January last year, we took over with the sole promise of course, saving their new year, making sure that their new year was better. So first some results and then the actual methodology. So if we then, for example, look at this year, so the results, what happened is we see that in September we're already overperforming in terms of the market based on all the adjustments we made. And I said I will jump to the adjustments right away, but just to showcase how like an actionable strategy, a combined effort between, of course, PriceLabs and Otamiser, AutoRank can really help you. First of all, what we did was we increased the view ratio on Airbnb. Here we see that, in the beginning of end of December, beginning of January, we took over the portfolio and we really started working on their Airbnb optimization. If you look at, this is the views they have, their listings have on Airbnb compared to the market. So compared to their comp, we see that from the moment we took over, it really started increasing. But not only the views, also conversion, which is of course leading towards how many people viewing my property are actually booking in. And it's a whole combination between price and listing optimization. How good are your pictures? How good are your reviews? So it's definitely a shared effort. But if we think of all the strategies that we implemented, it's a lot of things Leila already mentioned. It's being more reactive towards those market shifts. It's playing with those occupancy base, really making sure that whenever the market shifts, the strategy can lean towards those changing in the markets. But also it's about, you know, what we're specializing in is the more views you have, the more present you are in the search rankings, the more people view you, and the more people view you, the more clicks you have, the more bookings you have, the more pickup you have, the better your pricing strategy can really come to an endpoint. So it's all about, you know, this property manager was in a downward spiral where they didn't have enough clicks, they didn't have enough views, they weren't present in the search results very much. So they had to lower rates to hope to capture some people who were looking at booking low rates, but this was only pushing them further down because it's their team was underperforming because they didn't secure occupancy. But if you can start from a revenue strategy, from a distribution and pricing strategy all together and optimizing your search results, and then, you know, making your PriceLabs or your revenue management software strategy so it can tackle those changing market behaviors, those downward spirals can be reversed. And we were happy that this clients could see that results, and of course a shared customer between ourselves and PriceLabs.
All right, so Bart-Jan, we're looking at some results from a shared AutoRank slash Otamiser and PriceLabs customer, both on the occupancy. And so we see a big increase in year-on-year occupancy, which is of course partially due to these excellent page views results. How can any potential property managers perhaps listening this afternoon leverage both AutoRank and PriceLabs simultaneously?
So that's a good question, but for me, it's more of a why question. Why should a property manager use, and us being Otamiser and AutoRank and PriceLabs? PriceLabs, of course, and Leila, you know this more than we do, is excelling in dynamic pricing, putting rates based on logic and rationale behind it inside of the system. Where we are excelling is putting your listings on top of those online travel agents, of an Airbnb, of a Booking.com, of VRBO. We are making sure that your rates that your rates and your listings are displayed to the right amount of visitors, and that you have a maximum amount of views, maximum amount of clicks. Because if you increase your views, you will get bookings and you will get pickups. So what we do with Otamiser as well is we take over that full revenue management suite. We not only make sure you're on top of those OTAs, on top of an Airbnb, on top of a Booking, on top of a VRBO, and not only on top, making sure you're seen by the right amount of people and by the right people, by the right target audience. We also take care over your rate management, so you can just, you know, take a step back and focus on strategic things within your company. We link those rate strategies with everything we do on an OTA, because of course we can pump your views on an OTA, we can pump your first page impressions, but your rates also need to follow, and what your rates are doing today have an impact on your search views of tomorrow, and what your search views of tomorrow are saying then have an impact on which rates you can book on. So that's why, you know, we together with PriceLabs, we are an optimal, and I would not even say optimal, but a perfect match in getting the max profitability out of your property manager. But also on the PriceLabs question, I think Leila, you know this way better than I do, but in general, on the how, just shoot me or even yourself, Jarne, or Leila, a message on LinkedIn or something on their website, and we will be able to help you. And Leila, I probably said a lot of things you would also want to say, so I will give the floor to you.
Yeah, I was going to say our team is awesome regardless of kind of what size portfolio you have. We're always willing to help. So if you need any, you know, a second set of eyes or anyone to run ideas off of or anything, please feel free to reach out to your solutions consultant, reach out to our support team, anyone like that, and we're more than happy to help. I think that PriceLabs is phenomenal. Of course, I'm biased, but I think that there's a lot of things that people maybe don't know where to find, or maybe don't utilize in the same way that everyone else does, right? So with my job, I get to see how people's brains work, which is awesome, and pick up on like the way that some people interpret data and the way that they view the world, basically, right? Which is really fun. And so I think that the solutions consultants are a really valuable asset that people should be using if they've got them. And yeah, I think it's helpful to have another set of eyes or a different perspective on certain things. So even if you wanted to just, reach out to one of us and just pitch ideas or just chit chat, I think that that's a really fun and easy way to maybe get some ideas going, get some brainstorming going, all of that good stuff.
Before we check the questions from the audience, I have a question for PriceLabs. So Leila, I'm very curious to hear your answer. Of course, it has been all over LinkedIn lately, and it was everywhere in every newsletter, the new fees of Airbnb, like Airbnb changing their fee structure. How are you guys looking at that from a pricing perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that it's a tough one, right? A lot of markets have already kind of started doing a really similar thing, right? Like the big changes are mostly to the US. So we've had a little bit of experience with, folks in the EU and throughout the world really having really similar structures when it comes to Airbnb. So I think that the best thing we can do, we've got a couple of helpful videos on how to kind of manage that inside of PriceLabs. I think the big thing is everybody wants the same take home pay, right? Like they want the same amount to end up coming back to them. So with that in mind, a lot of sometimes maybe you need to change your base price or do some markups inside of your property management software. All of those things are definitely going to help you kind of maintain that like fine line of adapting but still being competitive, right? Everyone is probably going to be increasing rates, besides maybe a couple of folks who are behind the eight ball and are going to end up having a lower take home pay. But I think that it's just going to be taking a look at the market's data and, again, historical and future, and seeing how things are shaping up. We've primarily talked about occupancy trends here, so I'll keep that kind of in the same vein. If you notice that you are, you make a certain change, perhaps a 15% markup or something, you then notice that your occupancy is dwindling quite a bit, that may be an indicator that some folks around you aren't doing that and are being a little bit more competitively priced. So that's when it makes a lot of sense to, maybe use like the competitor calendar in PriceLabs and just see what other folks around you are doing, maintain, a little bit of parity if you'd like, or a little bit of competitiveness with them. But yeah, it's going to be a tough pill for a lot of people to swallow. Like it's going to impact businesses a lot, and the best we can do is adapt and kind of go with what the data says and what the market is showing and all of those things, right? Like that's all we can hope for, and hopefully everyone else adapts and it's not too much of a bother. But again, I don't think that PriceLabs algorithm and things like that are going to be too affected, just because it's a market-wide event, right? So it's going to be impacting essentially everyone in a very similar way. So trends will probably tend to stay the same. It's just going to be a matter of, including markups and including base price increases and things like that, so that your bottom line doesn't get too crazy low.
Yeah, I can agree with that. How I'm seeing it, that the professional parties, they will adjust markups so they have the same take home rate, and that's also something people are asking us, like, okay, the new Airbnb fees, am I going to be less visible in the search results or more visible? But as you said, if the market adapts, then this will just remain the same and the impact will be zero. Of course, I strongly believe that there will be a vacuum where some people wouldn't or didn't have a or haven't adjusted just yet and are planning to adjust, where the market will do some crazy stuff, but at the end of the day it will just be the same and everyone will be looking for the same take home rate.
Yeah, I think it's like a lull that's gonna be kind of wonky or kind of strange for a little bit, right? But it'll all even out again. COVID is like a really intense example of that. Like that was a big increase, and now we're kind of plateauing back again. I'm sure that this will be similar, but on a much smaller scale, obviously, where a month or two may be impacted while people catch up, and then things kind of level back out, hopefully.
Exactly.
Okay, thank you so much. Then I think we are down to the last part of this presentation, which is going to be a short QA. We did get this question a couple of times from the audience. It's a very specific one on PriceLabs. So a couple of people have asked this: what are the best ways to quickly detect when a listing within a portfolio or a group is configured differently? So I'm assuming people are referring to the hierarchy levels in PriceLabs, the account, group, listing, and level hierarchies. How does one get a good overview on that? Which settings are applied on which levels, especially when you're managing a big portfolio?
Yeah, absolutely. So there are a couple of ways to kind of go about this. As mentioned, so we've got some hierarchies in PriceLabs. You can set settings at the account level, which will be, for anything in your account, right? So if you're connected through a specific PMS, it'll be for all of the listings that are in that PMS. Then we've got group level settings. You create your own groups, and then you can make settings for those in bulk. And finally, listing level settings, right? So individual listings can be tweaked and adjusted. And in that same hierarchy is how it takes precedence, right? Like the account level settings are the least important. The listing level settings are the most important. So if you have opposing settings in each, the listing is going to take precedence. And then the next most important is going to be group. And then finally, account is going to be least important. This can get a little bit confusing when you do settings at all three levels, right? Sometimes folks have trouble telling which place a setting is coming from. There's two super duper easy ways to double check this. If there's one listing that you're concerned about and you feel like is maybe outside of the group that it's supposed to be in, on the left-hand side of the calendar page, you have your customizations, and it'll very quickly tell you whether it's set at like a group account level or if it's set at the listing level. So that's a super easy way. If you don't have an idea of a specific listing and just are thinking about kind of generalized, I want to make sure everything is, at a group level setting. If you go to the customizations page in PriceLabs, we've got a table view. And so if you just click on the listings and then click the table view, it'll tell you very, very quickly. It'll have like a list of all of the settings up top and all of your listings on the left-hand side. And it's a very easy view. I wish I could show you, but it'll just have a green check mark if it's at the listing level, and then it'll say group or account if it's at the group or account level. So in bulk, you can kind of skim through and see which ones are being done at listing levels and which ones are being done at group or account levels. And that should be a really, really easy way to fine tune and make sure that the settings you want to be making are the settings that are being implemented.
Okay. Leila. Thank you so much as well, Bart-Jan, for this webinar. Thanks everyone for joining us here. You'll receive the full replay of this session in your inbox shortly. It's been absolutely lovely, and see you guys next time.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, guys.